The plains of Nebraska are the kind of place where driving through makes you feel as if time has stopped. In late summer and early autumn, they stretch out in a limitless expanse of golden cornfields. But now they are soaked through with the chill of deep fall. The withered stalks rustle in the howling northwest wind, their sound a low, mournful sigh, like that of an old man. The earth extends to the horizon, meeting a vast, consuming grey sky, forming a desolate yet infinitely broad tableau of loneliness. Scattered across this ocean of emptiness are small, isolated towns, clinging to the lifeline of Interstate 80I80, the highway that cuts across the country. One such isolated settlement is the town of Cline Creek, named after a stream that is now almost entirely dry. It was built because of I-80 and survives because of it. Gas stations, fast food restaurants, a couple of auto parts stores, and a handful of motels form the town's entire ecosystem. Among them, the Cline Creek Motel is a familiar stop for many long-haul truckers and budget travelers. The grayish-white motel is unremarkable, just a row of simple single-story buildings. The white wooden siding was long ago stripped of its bright paint by the wind, sand, and relentless sun. A few neon tubes on the sign are broken, causing the vacancy sign to flicker unsteadily, offering a tired, reluctant welcome. The motel is run by old Walter Green and his son Sean. Walter is close to 70, his face etched with the passing of time and the abrasive winds of the plains. He always wears a worn-out plaid shirt, and his eyes are clouded. Yet he's meticulous when it comes to counting change and doing the books. His son, Sean, is a young man in his 30s, quiet and somewhat gloomy. He spends most of his time in the back of the motel, fixing broken pipes and electrical wiring, or robotically cleaning rooms like a puppet on a string. When he encounters a guest, his eyes avoid direct contact, and his body is slightly hunched, as if burdened by some heavy internal worry. There's a rumor in town that the Green family has been unlucky. Sean's mother passed away a few years ago, and just last week, his wife Emily, whom he had only recently married, died suddenly, reportedly from a sudden heart attack. It was too fast. No funeral has been held yet, and everything is quiet. But the motel has distinctly grown more oppressive since. Time passed slowly in this state of quiet repression until a rare, unseasonably early winter storm warning for the Midwest broke the motel's monotony. Temperatures on the plains plummeted, and the freezing rain and strong winds made traffic on I-80 unusually heavy and dangerous. Everyone wanted to get across this open, exposed territory before the roads completely iced over and visibility dropped to zero. Around 10 o'clock at night, the old rotary phone at the Cline Creek Motel rang non-stop. Old Walter's hoarse voice could only repeat the same reluctant words over and over. "I'm sorry, sir, ma'am, we're full. All the rooms are booked. We really have nothing left." Just as old Walter was on the phone turning a guest away, the glass door to the lobby was suddenly shoved open. 4 bedraggled men burst in, bringing with them a blast of icy, biting wind and the damp smell of rain. They were frantic and soaking wet, like sheep chased by wolves in a storm, now tumbling into the safety of the pen. The leader, David Chen, a sharp, capable sales director in his 40s, was trying to maintain his composure and leadership image. Even though he looked like a drowned rat, Behind him was Rajiv Patel, the technician, bespectacled with curly hair plastered to his scalp, his face etched with anxiety. Then came Marcus Johnson, the young rookie, who looked under 25. His blonde hair was also wetly pasted to his forehead, drops of water running down his chin, and his blue eyes were full of worry about the weather and the delay. Finally, there was Brian Miller, the financial advisor, slightly older, perhaps 50, with a more measured temperament, who was also looking utterly exhausted and soaked by the wretched weather. They were colleagues from the same company, traveling from Chicago to Denver for an important industry conference and trade show, sharing a rental, a black Chevrolet Suburban, and driving day and night. Do you have any rooms? Anything at all? A single bed? Even a couch? David asked urgently, his voice hoarse and anxious from the journey. The radio said the blizzard might force a road closure. The police are recommending that vehicles find safe shelter immediately. We have to stop here. Old Walter looked at the screen, covered in tiny red occupied markers, and shook his head helplessly. We really don't, boys. The last room went 10 minutes ago. I'm afraid you'll have to drive on to the next exit, Great Falls Town, or the next exit is 40 miles. Marcus cried out in despair. This weather is terrible. The wipers can barely keep up. The road conditions are going to get worse. Please, boss, you have to find a way, even a storage closet or a tool shed. We just need to make it through the next few hours. Sean Green, who had been quietly taking inventory in the small storage room out back, heard the commotion at the front desk. He silently walked out and leaned against the doorframe, wiping grease from his hands with a dirty rag. He looked out at the increasingly menacing weather. The rain was hitting the glass almost horizontally, and distant flashes of lightning illuminated the rolling dark clouds. He looked back at the four anxious men, especially young Marcus's near tearful face. His lips moved, and he spoke softly to his father. Dad, perhaps, the Rose Room? Walter's face instantly changed. He turned and glared fiercely at his son, his expression a complex mix of alarm, resistance, and unspeakable pain. His lips moved as if he wanted to shout a harsh rebuke, but it ultimately dissolved into a soft sigh, barely audible above the wind and rain. He turned back to the guests, his tone becoming hesitant, shifty, and unnatural, his fingers drumming unconsciously on the counter. Well, there is one space. But it's not a standard guest room. It's a small suite where my daughter-in-law, Emily, lived before she passed. She only left last week. It was so sudden. Sean hasn't had a chance to tidy up her things. There are still some of her personal belongings in there. It's very basic, hardly cleaned, and you probably won't be comfortable. Honestly, I don't recommend it. The air in the room suddenly tightened. The four men exchanged glances. The smell of death made them instinctively wary and uncomfortable. Yet the storms howling outside, the dense, fearful sound of rain hammering the roof, and the primitive terror of the night, magnifying the violent power of nature, were far more frightening. We don't care, Brian quickly said. The oldest of the four and the one who usually handled awkward situations. Mr. Green, please accept our condolences. We apologize deeply for the intrusion at such a time. But we truly just need a place to shelter, a few beds, just to survive the worst of this storm. We promise not to disturb anything, not to move a thing. We'll leave as soon as it's daylight and the rain lets up." His voice was sincere and apologetic. Old Walter still hesitated, his aged fingers rubbing together, his gaze flicking about. But Sean had already walked silently behind the counter and retrieved a separate, antique brass key from the back of a drawer. A small faded plastic rose charm dangled from the key. "Follow me." His voice was flat and emotionless, as if he was stating the most ordinary thing in the world. He grabbed an oilskin slicker hanging behind the door and put it on, gesturing for the four men to follow. They straightened their wet coats and plunged back out into the wind and rain. Sean led them past the main building toward a row of older, possibly later additions, single-story buildings a short distance from the main motel. The wind and rain seemed to intensify. The lighter men had to press their feet down to avoid being blown off balance. He stopped at the door of the very last unit. There was no number on the door, only the faint outline of a small, faded rose sticker, like the one on the key. The key slid into the lock with a dull click and turn. The door opened, and a complex aroma hit them, a mix of faint disinfectant, an overly sweet floral air freshener, clearly attempting to mask something, and an indefinable, stale smell, characteristic of a closed space. Faintly, there was also a very subtle, strange odor, sweet yet vaguely metallic. Sean flipped the switch, and a dim floor lamp in the corner, the only light source, cast long flickering shadows on the walls. The room was small, and the furnishings were simple, almost Spartan. What was most noticeable, or unsettling, was the sleeper sofa in the center of the room, covered with a white sheet. It appeared to have the distinct outline of a person lying down, rounded and contoured, though the sheet concealed exactly what it was. On a small table next to it, an aromatherapy diffuser was working hard, emitting a faint hum. This was likely the source of the sweet floral scent they'd noticed. The inner room was an even smaller bedroom. The door was ajar, revealing two narrow cots lined up side by side, topped with what looked like clean, thin blankets and pillows. "You'll sleep in there." Sean pointed to the cots in the inner room. He consistently avoided looking at the sleeper sofa in the center. "Don't touch the things in here." His voice became a little firmer, his gaze resting on the white shape in the center for the briefest of moments, before quickly moving away. He offered no explanation for what was underneath, as if it were just an ordinary piece of furniture. He turned and pulled the door shut. The four men took off their drenched coats and hung them up. The atmosphere in the room was so oppressive that it made them slightly breathless. Marcus, the youngest and most sensitive, whispered, his voice startlingly clear in the quiet room. "This place feels really weird. It's cold and creepy." He said some belongings are still here. Is he talking about that? He nervously glanced at the white-shrouded sofa in the center of the room, his Adam's apple involuntarily bobbing. "Don't freak yourself out, Marcus," David asserted, trying to sound like the leader, though he was just as uneasy. He had to keep morale up. They're probably just some personal effects. The owner didn't want to say so, afraid we'd be spooked. "Don't think about it. Get some sleep. We have to leave early tomorrow, hoping the weather clears up." David ran a hand over his wet hair, the dampness dripping from his tips, which he ignored. He and Brian exchanged a knowing glance and headed for the cots in the inner room. The two beds were standard single size, placed very close together with barely room for a person to walk between them. Brian lay down first on the cot closest to the aisle, and David threw himself onto the other side, lying back to back and side by side, each occupying the narrow space. Neither took off his boots or bothered with their wet clothes. Brian, being older, immediately closed his eyes, but his brow was furrowed, and his sleep was restless. Rajiv went to the other cot, turned onto his side facing the aisle, and instantly started to snore lightly. The journey had been exhausting. Their sheer fatigue had overcome their discomfort with the environment. Only Marcus remained standing. He watched his companion settle down to sleep, his eyes drawn to the white-covered sofa bed in the main room, instinctively feeling a strong sense of repulsion and fear. After a moment's hesitation, Marcus walked to the empty side of Rajiv's cot. He took off his muddy shoes, pulled back the blanket, and lay on his side. He wrapped himself tightly in the musty-smelling blanket, his damp, cold clothes sticking to his skin with an unavoidable, clammy feeling. He closed his eyes, desperately trying to block out the scene in the outer room, forcing himself to believe it was just a simple room, and he only needed to hold on until morning. Marcus was the youngest, but he was resilient enough to withstand the hardships of the journey. Yet, the strange, sickly sweet scent in the room made him irritable. He couldn't shake the feeling that beneath that floral fragrance, something else, something indescribable, was hidden. And the scent felt like a thin needle prickling his brain, keeping him uneasy and unable to sleep. The physical discomfort, the cramped space, and the tension from the unfamiliar environment made Marcus's senses exceptionally sharp. He heard the faint humming of the diffuser in the outer room, the sharp shriek of the wind and rain outside, and could even clearly distinguish his companion's heavy breathing and snoring from the other cot. Time passed slowly in this state of bizarre magnification, as he struggled on the edge of wakefulness and sleep, just as his consciousness began to blur, and his eyelids felt too heavy to resist sleep. An extremely faint, strange sound drilled into his ear. Susla,